The year is 200 BC. Rome has just finished the most brutal war of its existence. Hannibal Barca crossed the Alps with his elephants. He destroyed 3 Roman field armies in 3 years. He killed a Roman consul at the Trebia River. He annihilated another at Lake Trasimene. At Cannae in 216, he killed between 50,000 and 70,000 Roman soldiers in a single afternoon. The bloodiest day in Roman history. And Rome still won. 16 years of war, hundreds of thousands dead. Southern Italy burned and depopulated, but Rome absorbed it all and kept fighting. Now, in 200 BC, the legions are rested. The treasury is slowly recovering, and the Roman Senate is looking east, because while Rome was bleeding against Carthage, the Hellenistic world, the kingdoms built on the ruins of Alexander the Great's empire, had been doing what it always did, fighting each other. This is the story of how that pattern created an opening, and how Rome walked through it, and how a civilization that conquered half the known world was absorbed piece by piece over the next 50 years. To understand why Greece fell to Rome, you have to understand the world that existed before Rome arrived in it. When Alexander the Great died in Babylon in 323 BC, he left behind an empire stretching from Greece to the borders of modern India. He also left behind no clear heir. What followed were 40 years of wars between his generals, the Diadochi, the successors. By the time the dust settled around 275 BC, 3 major power blocks had emerged. Antigonid Macedon controlled Greece and the northern Aegean. The Seleucid Empire held Syria, Persia, and most of Asia Minor. Ptolemaic Egypt sat on the Nile, rich beyond comparison, and largely content to stay there. Between them, a network of smaller states tried to survive. Pergamon in Western Asia Minor, Rhodes, a powerful maritime republic in the Aegean, the Aetolian League and the Achaean League, federations of Greek city-states that tried to play the great powers against each other to maintain their independence. This system had a certain stability. When one power grew too strong, the others formed coalitions to contain it. It was fragile, constantly contested, and produced almost continuous warfare. But it functioned. Then Rome appeared on the Adriatic coast, and the rules changed. Modern historians, particularly Eric Gruen in his landmark 1984 study, The Hellenistic World and the Coming of Rome, have argued persuasively that Rome did not enter the Greek world with a grand plan of conquest. There was no Senate meeting where men in togas decided to absorb Greece. What happened was more dangerous than deliberate planning. It was reactive, opportunistic, and driven by a Roman cultural logic that made permanent withdrawal almost structurally impossible. Once Rome intervened, it could not stop intervening, not because it wanted an empire, but because the alternative withdrawal and the appearance of weakness was unacceptable to Roman political culture. The result was the same. Greece was gone within a human lifetime. The story begins not in Greece, but in Illyria, the mountainous coastal region occupying what is now modern Albania and the Dalmatian coast. In the mid-3rd century BC, Illyria was a patchwork of tribal kingdoms, frequently described by Greek and Roman sources as barbaric and uncivilized. Modern archaeology complicates this picture considerably. Excavations at sites like Apollonia and Dyrrhachium reveal a sophisticated urban culture with significant Greek influence along the coast, Hellenized elites, and extensive Mediterranean trading networks. The Greek characterization of Illyrians as barbarians was partly genuine cultural contempt and partly political positioning, the same rhetoric Rome would later use to justify its own interventions. In the 230s BC, a tribal confederation under a king named Agron unified much of Illyria and expanded aggressively southward, seizing the Epirote city of Phanis in 230. When Agron died, power passed to his wife Tata, who governed as regent for her stepson. Under her leadership, Illyrian raiding and piracy in the Adriatic intensified sharply. Roman merchant shipping was being attacked. Roman traders were being killed or enslaved, and Roman commerce with the Greek East, growing in importance every decade, was being disrupted. In 230 BC, the Senate took the unusual step of sending a diplomatic mission first, before mobilizing the legions. Two brothers named Coruncanius traveled to Teiuta's court and delivered the Roman position with characteristic bluntness. The piracy would stop now, or there would be consequences. The precise details of what followed are disputed by ancient sources, but the outcome is clear. A Roman envoy was killed, either during the meeting or shortly after. And in 229 BC, Rome sent 200 warships and 22,000 soldiers across the Adriatic. The campaign was brief and decisive. Teuta's coalition fragmented. A Greek lord named Demetrius of Pharos, who controlled the island of Corcyra on behalf of the Illyrian queen, switched sides to Rome almost immediately. By Teuta had signed a treaty. Her kingdom was broken into smaller, weaker components. Illyrian vessels were forbidden from sailing south of a set boundary. Rome then did something that would become its defining pattern throughout the entire conquest of Greece. It withdrew its troops, but it left behind its amicia, its friendship, a warm-sounding Latin term that, in practice, meant something considerably more binding: informal client status. The cities and rulers who accepted Roman friendship were expected to behave as Rome required, and to call on Rome when they needed help, and Rome reserved the right to intervene in their affairs whenever it saw fit. Rome had no garrison in Illyria, but Illyria was now functionally within Rome's sphere. The man Rome rewarded most generously for his defection, Demetrius of Pharos, would prove to be the next problem. Within a decade of receiving his small principality from Roman hands, Demetrius had quietly rebuilt Illyrian power, married into the old ruling family, and in 220 BC launched a grand piracy expedition through the Adriatic in direct violation of his treaty with Rome. Rome was occupied with a war against the Gauls in northern Italy. Demetrius had calculated that Rome would not respond. He was wrong. In 219 BC, a Roman force captured his two main strongholds in under a week. Demetrius himself escaped on hidden galleys, fleeing south along the coast until he reached the port of Actium, where the fleet of a Macedonian king named Philip V was anchored. Philip welcomed him warmly. Demetrius became a senior advisor at the Macedonian court, and from that court he would help set in motion events that would eventually destroy the kingdom that sheltered him. To understand Philip V, you need to understand the kingdom he inherited. The Antigonid dynasty of Macedon had ruled Greece since Antigonus II Gonatas consolidated power around 272 BC. For 60 years they maintained hegemony over the Greek city-states through a combination of garrison control, political manipulation, and the selective use of force. Philip V came to the throne as a young man in 221 BC. He was energetic, militarily gifted, and deeply ambitious. He also inherited a Macedon weakened by decades of war and a treasury under pressure. When news of Hannibal's crushing victory at Cannae reached his court in 216 BC, Philip saw an opportunity: a dying Roman republic, an alliance with Carthage, control of the Adriatic coast. It seemed like a window that might not open again. He signed a formal treaty with Hannibal. A Roman naval patrol captured the Macedonian envoys and retrieved the document. Rome now knew that Macedon was their enemy. But Rome was still fighting Hannibal. It did not have the resources for a full Eastern war. So the Senate did what it could. It used diplomacy as a military tool. In 211 BC, Rome concluded a treaty with the Aetolian League, Macedon's most aggressive Greek rival. The terms were structured around a simple logic. The Aetolians would fight Macedon on the ground in Greece. Rome would provide naval support and keep Philip occupied. Any captured territory would go to the Aetolians. Movable plunder would go to Rome. The resulting First Macedonian War was a grinding, inconclusive slog, with no decisive battles and significant suffering for the civilian populations of Thessaly. Neither side achieved its objectives. By 205 BC, with the Aetolians exhausted and Rome desperate to focus on Carthage, both sides accepted a peace that essentially restored the pre-war status quo. Rome had not conquered anything. Philip had not achieved anything. But Rome had demonstrated something of fundamental importance. It could intervene in Greek affairs without committing its full military power. It could use client states as proxies. And it could walk away when convenient, leaving the situation open for a future intervention. The war had been a draw in military terms. In strategic terms, Rome had learned exactly what it needed to know. When Philip V heard the news of Rome's final victory over Carthage at Zama in 202 BC, he did not recalibrate. Together with the Seleucid king Antiochus III, Philip had been moving aggressively through the Aegean, seizing Ptolemaic territories and establishing Macedonian control over island chains that had previously been beyond his reach. Modern scholars have debated whether a formal agreement existed between Philip and Antiochus to partition Ptolemaic overseas possessions. The ancient sources describe such a pact, but some historians argue this was Roman propaganda designed to justify intervention. What is not disputed is the outcome. Philip's expansion was alarming the smaller Hellenistic states. Rhodes and Pergamon, both wealthy, both with significant military capacity, sent ambassadors west to Rome. This is the moment that Arthur Eckstein's work on Roman imperialism highlights as critical. It was not Rome that went looking for a reason to intervene. It was the smaller Greek powers, frightened of Macedonian hegemony, that opened the door. They saw Rome as a manageable counterweight, a powerful ally that could be invited in and then, presumably, invited back out. They miscalculated. The Roman Senate debated war in 200 BC. The popular assembly initially rejected it. War weariness after the Punic War was real and documented. But the Senate persisted. A consul named Sulpicius Galba compared the Macedonian threat explicitly to Hannibal. The emotional argument worked. Rome declared war on Philip V. The consul sent east to command the operation was named Titus Quinctius Flaminius. He was young, illegally young for his rank, according to Roman law, passionate, highly educated in Greek culture, and politically ambitious in ways that would shape the entire war. Flamininus maneuvered Philip out of a strong defensive position on the Aeus River, using a flanking movement guided by a local epirote nobleman. The loss of Philip's baggage train and the subsequent defection of wavering allies fundamentally changed the political landscape. The decisive moment came in the spring of 197 BC on the fog-covered ridges of Thessaly, near a place called Kynocephalae. The dogs' heads, two armies blundered into each other in poor visibility. The battle began as a skirmish and escalated into a general engagement before either commander had chosen his ground. Philip's Macedonian phalanx, the military system that Alexander the Great had used to conquer the world, was ferociously effective on its right wing, pushing the Roman left back toward collapse. But on the left, a Roman tribune, unnamed in our sources, made a decision that changed the course of history. Without orders, he wheeled roughly 2,000 veteran troops away from the victorious right wing and drove them directly into the rear of Philip's advancing phalanx. The phalanx cannot fight in two directions. Its sarissa pikes, averaging around 6 meters in length, require precise formation and level ground. Attacked from behind on broken Thessalian hillside, the phalangists fragmented. Macedonian dead, approximately 8,000. Roman dead, approximately 700. The disproportion tells you everything about what happened. Philip sued for peace. The terms imposed at the subsequent conference stripped him of his fleet, cost him his overseas possessions and most of his Greek influence, and reduced him to a client of Rome. Then Flamininus did something extraordinary. At the Isthmian Games of 196 BC, the great Pan-Hellenic festival attended by Greeks from across the Mediterranean, he mounted the speaker's platform and proclaimed that all Greeks were now free from Macedonian garrisons, free from tribute, autonomous, The crowd erupted. Ancient sources describe such noise that birds fell from the sky. Flamininus was mobbed, covered in garlands, treated as a liberator and a god. It was masterful politics, and it was, in a meaningful sense, completely false. Rome had no intention of truly withdrawing from Greek affairs. The freedom on offer was freedom from Macedon, which meant freedom to exist within Rome's informal empire instead. The Greek city-states had traded one hegemon for another. The new one was just less visible, for now. The loudest response to Flaminianus's proclamation of Greek freedom came not from the Greeks themselves, but from the most powerful ruler in the eastern Mediterranean. Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, known to his contemporaries as the Great, had spent 15 years rebuilding what had once been the largest empire Alexander left behind. He had campaigned into Central Asia, forced the submission of Parthian and Bactrian rulers, and concluded a victorious war against Egypt that left him in control of territories stretching from modern Turkey to modern Iran. He was not prepared to accept Roman proclamations about Greek freedom as a statement of fact. From his perspective, Rome was a Western power that had no legitimate authority over the cities of Asia Minor or Thrace. He had a point. The collision between Roman ambition and Seleucid power was made inevitable by a cast of supporting characters. The Aetolian League, which had fought Rome's war against Macedon but received far less from the peace than it expected, was furious. It invited Antiochus to liberate Greece in 192 BC, and sitting at the Seleucid court in a position of uneasy semi-influence was the most dangerous man in the Mediterranean, Hannibal Barca, exiled from Carthage and looking for a new employer. Antiochus crossed into Greece in autumn of 1992 with a relatively small army, around 10,000 men. It was a strategic error that reflected his fundamental misreading of the situation. He believed the Greeks would rise en masse to support him. They did not. Pergamon remained loyal to Rome. The Achaean League remained loyal to Rome. Athens remained loyal to Rome. Even many Aetolians proved reluctant to commit fully. With no clear military target, Rome had no garrison in Greece to attack, and no allies beyond the Aetolians. Antiochus moved south toward the obvious symbolic position. Thermopylae, the same narrow coastal pass where 300 Spartans had held back Xerxes' Persian millions in 480 BC. Antiochus positioned his men at the gate, posted Aetolian units to guard the mountain paths above, and prepared to bottle up the Roman advance. The Roman consul Manius Acilius Glabrio attacked in spring of 191 BC. The main assault on the coastal pass was a bloody slog. Roman legionaries pressed forward under missile fire and artillery. Catapults and ballistae positioned on the walls Antiochus had constructed, and were repeatedly driven back by the phalanx. The battle was decided not at the pass, but above it, a flanking column under Marcus Porcius Cato. Yes, that Cato, the famous conservative moralist, found the Aetolians guarding the mountain path above Calidromus, either asleep or insufficiently watchful, and broke through. When Antiochus saw Roman troops appearing on the heights above his position, he did what commanders in that situation always do. He retreated. The retreat became a rout. Most of his army was killed or captured. Antiochus himself fled east with his cavalry. What followed was a naval war in the Aegean as Rome, Pergamon, and Rhodes combined their fleets to defeat Seleucid admirals at Sissus, Myonessus, and in a final engagement near Eurymedon, a battle notable for the fact that the Seleucid naval commander was Hannibal Barca, pressed into service as an admiral, despite having no naval experience. He lost. With the sea route secure, the Scipio brothers, Lucius in formal command, his brother Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus, present as his legate, Antiochus offered peace terms. The Scipios rejected them. The final confrontation came at Magnesia by Sipylus in December of 190 BC. The armies were roughly equal in size. Modern scholarship, particularly the work of John Granger and Bezalel Bar Kokhba, has revised the ancient figures significantly downward from the dramatically disproportionate numbers in Livy and Polybius, who were writing with obvious pro-Roman bias, not the 2-1 Seleucid advantage claimed in the ancient texts. Antiochus commanded a diverse army assembled from across his vast empire. Macedonian-style phalangists, Iranian and Armenian cataphract cavalry, Galatian mercenaries, scythed chariots, and Indian war elephants. The battle opened badly for the Seleucids. Rain before the engagement dampened bowstrings, degrading the effectiveness of their missile arm. The scythed chariots, terrifying in theory, were dispersed by Roman skirmishers who simply stepped aside, let the vehicles pass, and then attacked the horses from behind. In one of history's more colorful tactical disasters, the panicked chariot horses then collided with Antiochus's own camel-mounted archers. On the Seleucid right wing, Antiochus himself led a brilliant cavalry charge that crushed the Roman left and pursued it almost to the Roman camp. But he was too far from his center to affect what was happening there. The Pergamene cavalry of King Eumenes II destroyed the Seleucid left. The phalanx, encircled, attempted to form a defensive square and fight its way back to the Seleucid camp. It was still fighting when Antiochus finally returned, but it was already too late. The peace terms imposed at Apamea in 188 BC were total. Antiochus was stripped of all territory north and west of the Taurus Mountains, an enormous loss of land, population, and tax revenue. He was forbidden from keeping a meaningful navy. He surrendered all his war elephants. He paid a massive war indemnity, and he was required to give up certain named enemies of Rome, including, had they been able to find him, Hannibal Barca. Hannibal evaded Roman hands for years before taking poison to avoid capture, sometime around 183 BC. He was in his early 60s. He reportedly said, as he died, that he would relieve the Romans of their anxiety about an old man. The Seleucid Empire survived another century and a half, but it never recovered its power. The Roman-Pergamene alliance now dominated the Aegean. No Hellenistic power remained capable of challenging Rome in the field. Philip V of Macedon spent the years after his defeat at Cynocephalae doing what defeated kings always do, rebuilding, quietly, while appearing to comply. He reorganized taxation. He developed mining operations in the Macedonian mountains. He recruited, trained, and armed a new generation of soldiers. He was careful to maintain the formal appearance of the client relationship with Rome. When Philip died in 179 BC, his son Perseus inherited a Macedon that was significantly stronger than the kingdom the Romans believed they had permanently weakened. Perseus was politically sophisticated. He built networks across the Greek world, married his sister to the king of Bithynia, himself married the daughter of the Seleucid king, and cultivated a reputation among the Greek city-states as the true defender of Hellenic culture and independence. He was positioning himself as the alternative to Roman hegemony. Carefully, non-aggressively, but unmistakably, the kingdom that most loudly objected was Pergamon. King Eumenes II traveled to Rome in 172 BC and delivered a speech to the Senate arguing that Perseus was preparing for war, that Macedonia had fully recovered its strength, and that if Rome failed to act now, it would face the same threat it had already defeated twice. The Senate was persuaded. Modern historians have noted with some irony that Rome's decision to go to war with Perseus was partly triggered by the warnings of an ally, Pergamon, whose interest in weakening Macedon was not identical to Rome's. The Third Macedonian War began in 171 BC. Its first campaign season went badly for Rome. At Callinicus in Thessaly, Perseus's cavalry and elite infantry defeated the Roman forces in open battle, killing around 200 cavalry and 2,000 infantry for the loss of only 60 Macedonians. It was the most significant Macedonian military success since before Cynocephalae, and it changed nothing strategically. Rome replaced commanders, increased forces, and kept coming. The decisive moment came with the appointment of Lucius Aemilius Paulus as consul for 168 BC. Paulus was experienced, methodical, and, unlike several of his predecessors, genuinely willing to wait for the right conditions before attacking. He found Perseus dug in on the west bank of the Elpius River, with Mount Olympus at his back, a position so strong that Paulus refused his own officers' demands to attack it immediately. Instead, he sent a flanking column under Publius Nasica through mountain passes to appear behind the Macedonian position. A Cretan deserter warned Perseus. The king sent forces to block the pass. The Romans fought through anyway. Perseus abandoned his river position and fell back to the plain near Pydna, where he drew up his army on flat ground, with a small ridge at his back. The Battle of Pydna, fought in June of 168 BC, was triggered not by military planning, but by a runaway pack mule and the soldiers who chased it to a stream, where Macedonian troops were also drawing water. The resulting skirmish escalated before either general was ready. On flat ground with room to maneuver, the Macedonian phalanx was devastating in its opening advance. The 21,000 Sarissa-armed phalangists lowered their pikes and drove into the Roman front, pushing the legionaries back despite their best efforts. Ancient sources describe Roman soldiers dying on Macedonian pikes that they could not get close enough to counter. The battle was saved, as Cynocephalae had been saved, not by superior tactics but by terrain and adaptability. The advancing phalanx moved onto uneven ground. Gaps opened in the formation. Roman centurions, the backbone of the legionary system, recognized the opening without waiting for orders and drove their maniples into the gaps. The phalanx, breached in multiple places, began to fragment. Numidian cavalry swept around the flanks. War elephants drove through the Macedonian left. Perseus fled the battlefield on horseback. His elite agema, the royal guard, fought to the last man rather than surrender. Around 20,000 Macedonians were killed. 11,000 more were captured. Perseus was found hiding in a temple on the island of Samothrace. He was brought to Rome in chains. He died in Roman custody, probably around 165 BC. Archaeological evidence from Vergina in modern Greece, the site of ancient Aegae, the Macedonian royal burial ground, illuminates this period with extraordinary physical detail. The royal tombs, excavated by Manolis Andronikos from 1977 onward, contain armor, weapons, gold diadems, and ivory portrait fragments. From the last generation of Antigonid kings, they are the material remains of the world that Pydna ended. After the battle, the Antigonid monarchy was dissolved. Macedon was divided into 4 separate administrative districts, the Merides, each governed independently, forbidden from trading with the others, forbidden from intermarrying across boundaries, forbidden from an independent foreign policy. The Epirotes, who had supported Perseus, fared even worse. 70 settlements were destroyed. Around 150,000 people were enslaved. The scale of this punishment was a deliberate statement. There would be no further experiments with Macedonian independence. The Roman settlement after Pydna was designed to prevent any future challenge. It was thorough, punitive, and deeply resented. The resentment found a vessel in 150 BC in the form of a young man from Western Asia Minor, named Andriskos. Andriskos claimed to be the son of the late king Perseus. The physical resemblance was apparently striking. He began traveling through the Greek world, gathering support, building a network, and eventually reaching Thrace, where local chieftains who viewed Roman expansion with alarm gave him soldiers. In 149 BC, he entered Macedon. The local nobility raised armies to stop him. He defeated them. The population, impoverished by Roman taxation and humiliated by partition, welcomed him. He took the throne as Philip VI. He invaded Thessaly. He sent envoys to Carthage. For a moment it appeared that everything Rome had built in the Greek world since Pydna might unravel. But the moment didn't last. Rome sent a veteran commander, Quintus Caecilius Metellus, who landed in Macedonia directly rather than the traditional entry point in Epirus, cutting Andriscos off from his Thracian base of support. At a second battle of Pydna in 148 BC, Andriscos was betrayed by his own cavalry commander during the fight. His army broke. He was captured, sent to Rome, and executed. This time, there was no experiment with Macedonian autonomy. Metellus organized Macedon, Epirus, southern Illyria, and the Ionian Islands into a single Roman province, Provincia Macedonia. The Greek world was now substantially a Roman possession. What remained was the mopping up. The Achaean League, the federation of Greek city-states in the Peloponnese, had been a Roman ally since the Second Macedonian War. But the relationship had always been uncomfortable. The Achaeans were proud Greeks who had cooperated with Rome because it was strategically necessary, not because they accepted Roman authority as legitimate. In 147 BC, a dispute between Sparta and the League prompted Rome to make demands that were, at minimum, provocative. Roman envoys told the Achaean assembly that Sparta, Corinth, Argos, and Orchomenus should be separated from the League, effectively dismembering the federation. The Achaean assembly rejected the demands loudly. What followed was less a war than a political breakdown. The League elected a series of increasingly defiant generals. A Roman embassy was publicly insulted. The League declared war on Rome in 146 BC. It was not a rational military calculation. The Achaeans had, perhaps, 14 infantry at maximum, against Roman forces that, with Metellus marching south from Macedonia and a new consul Lucius Mummius landing from the west, would outnumber them approximately 2-1. The final battle was fought at Leucopetra, near the Corinthian Isthmus, in 146 BC. Mummius was cautious. He held his position for a day when more aggressive action might have ended it faster. Dies, the Achaean general, used the time to attack the Roman camp with his light troops and inflict meaningful casualties. But the next morning, the main battle was decisive. The Romans outnumbered the Achaeans in cavalry so thoroughly that both Achaean flanks were overrun simultaneously before the infantry engagement in the center was resolved. Dies fled. His army collapsed. Corinth, one of the wealthiest and most culturally significant cities in the Mediterranean world, a city that had been continuously inhabited and commercially dominant for over 1,000 years, was burned to the ground. Its male population was killed. Its women and children were enslaved. Its art treasures were shipped to Rome. The date was 146 BC, the same year Rome destroyed Carthage. 2 civilizations in 1 year. Greece was now Rome's. Not as a colony, exactly. Most of the territory was folded into the province of Macedonia. The remaining city-states were designated as free, the same Roman freedom that Flamininus had proclaimed 50 years earlier, which meant free to do what Rome approved of. The question historians have argued about ever since is whether this outcome was inevitable, whether it was planned, or whether it was the unintended consequence of a series of reactive decisions made over 5 decades by a republic that never quite understood what it was building. The honest answer is probably all 3, depending on which decade you look at. Rome in 229 BC was genuinely just protecting Adriatic trade routes. Rome in 200 BC was responding to the requests of smaller Greek powers who feared Macedon. Rome in 168 BC was determined to permanently eliminate any Greek power capable of challenging it. Rome in 146 BC was setting an example. At what point does pragmatic intervention become empire? Rome never answered that question clearly. It just kept intervening. What the Romans took from Greece was, in cultural terms, more than they brought. Greek philosophy, Greek art, Greek literature, Greek science, all of it flowed west into Rome, and through Rome into every culture that followed. The poet Horace, writing 2 generations after Corinth burned, put it plainly: captive Greece took captive her fierce conqueror, Modern genetic studies of Mediterranean populations from this period, including landmark work using ancient DNA from Roman-era burial sites across Italy and Greece, show significant population movement during the imperial period. The genetic contribution of Greek populations to Roman Italy was substantial and bidirectional. Greek colonists, enslaved people, freedmen, merchants, scholars, and soldiers all moved through a world that Rome had unified. The Hellenistic kingdoms are gone. The language survived. The philosophy survived. The medicine survived. In the 15th century, when Constantinople fell to the Ottomans, Greek scholars fled west carrying manuscripts. Those manuscripts ignited the Renaissance. The Renaissance produced the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution produced the modern world. The thread from Alexander's Greece to the screen you're watching this on is unbroken. Rome conquered Greece. Greece never stopped shaping the world.